have been a game changer would have been, 2 years ago, if the President of the United States and the British Prime Minister had said, it is our strategic objective that Russia is defeated and that Ukraine is able to reestablish sovereignty over its internationally recognized 1991 borders. And we're going to give them everything they need to do that. I mean, the war could have been over last year if we had been committed to it. I am Ben Hodges, U.S. Army Lieutenant General, retired. My last duty was as Commanding General of U.S. Army in Europe. The Biden administration has done a good job on many aspects of support for Ukraine, but they have failed the critical task, which is to clearly identify the strategic objective. Why are we supporting Ukraine? Why is this important for us in the U.S. in the West? And if you don't have a clear objective, it's very difficult to have good, clear, effective policy. And so that's why we end up with these goofy policies of here you can have ATACMS, but you can't use them against certain targets. You can't defend yourself. I attribute this to the fact that the Biden administration has an excessive fear that Russia might somehow escalate. And of course, the Russians see that. That's why they'll trot out every week or two, we're changing our nuclear doctrine, or we will have to respond, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, we've already seen the Russian response has been furious. They are ratcheting up the threat of nuclear war. They've changed their doctrine, as you say. Should we be worried about that? As somebody who's watched them closely for such a long time, what did you make of that move?
I make of this as a continuation of their use of scaremongering, disinformation, because they see that we in the West are vulnerable to this. Look, I think that, of course, you have to take it serious. They have thousands of nuclear warheads. They don't care how many innocent people they kill, including their own. So you have to ask, why would they actually use a nuclear weapon, a tactical nuclear weapon? As I look at it, there's no benefit for them to actually use a tactical nuclear weapon. It won't change anything on the battlefield because, unlike in the Cold War days, when that was the Soviet army, the Russian army does not possess the trained and properly equipped capability to exploit whatever situation would occur on the battlefield after the employment of a tactical nuclear weapon. There's nobody there that can operate in a radioactive environment and exploit that. So there's no practical benefit. Secondly, China and India have both told the Russians, do not use nuclear weapons. And this is not a moral thing for them, but they don't want any disruption of their access to cheap Russian oil and gas. And so why would they do it? What do they get from it? And there are only downsides for them. It's the threat that they might do it is where they get their biggest benefit.
If they were to do something, I mean, on Russian state TV, we've seen all sorts of options being discussed. The threat of nuking Britain, the threat of a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine. Do you think we might see them trying to attack countries in Europe in any way? I mean, I understand it may not be nuclear. What should we be watching out for?
Well, Manveen, I think we should be in the mindset that the Russians are already at war with us, not in the traditional kinetic sense, but the Russians don't look at us through the lens of at war, not at war. This is for them constant use of everything that they have, from criminal activity, disinformation, threats, to demonstrations of military capability, pushing or violating airspace, violating freedom of navigation. Just, of course, this week out in the Baltic Sea, undersea cables have been cut. Even the Germans are having to say, okay, nobody on the planet believes this was an accident. So this is the kind of thing that goes on. We've had examples of Russian cruise missiles flying through Romanian airspace, Polish airspace, Latvia. And until we get in the mindset that these are not only are these unacceptable activities, but we're going to do something about it, then they're going to just keep doing it. So no, they're not going to launch a missile against London or something like that. They are not going to launch something that is obviously an armed attack against a NATO country, because I think they still are pretty certain that most of NATO would respond in a way that would be catastrophic for Russia. But they are constantly pushing the limits of that, and I think our leaders need to talk to us as adults and say, "Look, this is what's at stake. This is what's at risk. This is what we're going to do about it."
Are you alarmed by how quickly things seem to be escalating? Are we moving closer and closer to what people are calling World War III? Have you known a time as dangerous as this?
Um, Actually, I don't see us that are moving rapidly towards World War III. That's what the Russians want us to think.
Hmm.
This what's escalating is their talk about it because they see how vulnerable we are in our open Western societies, and of course they're looking at the U.S. where we're about 2 months away from a transition of power to the Trump administration. So um, they're exploiting that kind of seam, if you will, on our side. But I don't think that we're any closer to the war expanding than we were 2 years ago. What has prolonged this conflict was the lack of decisiveness by the West. From the very beginning, I think the Russians really did believe they thought they were going to be done in a few days. That really was a special military operation for them. And President Biden deserves so much credit, along with British, French, German, other leaders who said, no, this is not acceptable. But we stopped short of being decisive about the outcome. And so now, if you talk to anybody in the Biden administration, you say, what's the objective? What are we doing? They would tell you, well, we want Russia to lose, and we want to avoid escalation, and we want Ukraine to have a good negotiating position. What a empty bottle that is. Why are we not saying what's at stake here? This is not about Ukraine. This is about stability and security for all of Europe, sovereignty, borders,
Hmm.
international agreements, freedom of navigation, things that affect our life, that affect our economies. That's what's at stake.
And that indecisiveness, we've President Biden refused to allow these missiles to be used just 2 months ago. He's now changed his mind. How much has that cost the war in Ukraine? I mean, is there any chance that this is in any way decisive at this point, or have they just left it too late?
Well, there is no one weapon or vehicle or platform that is decisive in and of itself, especially or unless it comes in massive numbers. And
Mm.
clearly, that's not happening here. This is better. It will allow Ukraine to degrade or undermine Russia's own advantage of mass by destroying headquarters and logistics, but it's not going to be decisive. What would have been a game changer would have been, 2 years ago, if the president of the United States and the British Prime Minister had said, it is our strategic objective that Russia is defeated and that Ukraine is able to reestablish sovereignty over its internationally recognized 1991 borders. And we're going to give them everything they need to do that. Instead of this namby-pamby, we're with you for as long as it takes, which means nothing, of course, and nobody believes it anyway. So, I mean, the war could have been over last year if we had been committed to it. I would still say that Russia, their economy right now is in deep trouble. What they have done is propped up by a lot of artificial structures that are not sustainable. They're having to import ammunition from North Korea, for God's sake. They fear the public reaction if you have a bunch of funerals in Moscow and St. Petersburg, so they are avoiding drafting men from those two metropolitan areas, and they're now going to be depending on North Korean troops to help fill the requirement for mass. So I think Russia actually is in trouble, and it's right now is the wrong time for us to take our foot off the gas.
That's The Story from The Times and The Sunday Times. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.